ಅಂತ ಹೋಗುತ್ತೆ. ನನ್ನಪ್ಪಿದೆ ಅಂತ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗುತ್ತೆ.
Hi, Prabita, can you confirm that you can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great.
Okay.
So
I
we'll
hope Maria will also join for the first 40 minutes.
sorry.
Maria told us she will also join for the first 40 minutes.
Okay, great. But Maria has not yet joined, no?
No, she had not joined.
Not yet. Okay. So in a couple of minutes, we can start. And
Okay,
at that time, maybe all those joining us, I'll just request them to first ask any questions for Maria, and then I can jump in.
Okay.
Yeah.
So all the students, this is Professor Kavita.
Hi, I'm Kavita.
And,
nice to meet you.
And please ask your questions soon or don't delay for the last part. So you will miss couple of answers. So please ask the questions or directly post in the chat box so she can answer the questions.
Yes. So how, for those of you who are here, how have the videos been till now? You've been able to follow all the material? Have the explanations and the depth been sufficient? You can post any thoughts in the chat box also, or unmute and speak and chat with us.
Kavita, we might need to wait for some time. There's only 13 participants. I think more will join.
Yes, that's why I thought I'll just chat.
Okay.
While we are waiting for others.
Okay.
Oh, I would also love to be in the Nilgiris now. Bangalore is getting quite warm. There's Janardhan, I think, who's said greetings from the Nilgiris.
Maria also has joined in the.
Oh, great. Okay.
Maria,
Hi, Maria. You can hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So, why don't, those of you who have questions, why don't you either type your questions or unmute and, tell us if there's anything you'd like, any comments or any discussion points you'd like to bring up or any questions that you have. So I know that in the first video that I made, which was about social behavior, I know that when I first started reading up about social behavior, I used to find the concept of inclusive fitness quite difficult. So, any questions regarding that or any other concepts?
We've tried our very best to keep up with the questions on that have been sent via the Q&A. And so for some of you who have posted your questions there, we've given you responses. Now is also a good time for you to bring those questions back up if you find that there's more that you don't understand or there's more that you want to understand better.
Maria, this is Pravida. Okay. So if you have, I think there are a few couple of questions which is unanswered in the Q&A. What do you think we can take that question and answer here?
Good idea. Yes. And yeah, while we're doing that, if that sparks any other questions in your mind, we can take that up too. Yeah. Prabita, can you just do you have that open right now?
I can open that and read to you. Somebody also already asked a question, but I can.
Oh, right. Yeah. So maybe I can address this from assignment 2 while, and we can look at those questions if other questions don't come up. Okay. So this question from assignment 2 was about life history theory. According to life history theory, which of the following sets of traits is likely to be seen in a species that's found in an unstable environment? So the idea is that in an unstable environment, resources, key factors like, resources, for example, can just either be really high or really low, but basically you don't get a predictable environment. So in such an environment, if the first option is long development period, long lifespan, many offspring, and relatively low investment in each offspring. So in an unstable environment, if you have a long development period and long lifespan, by the time you get to reproduction, it's very possible that, in a catastrophe like a flood or a drought or a resource crunch, the individual dies. So in an unstable environment, what theory predicts is that individuals which live short lives, develop fast, mature fast, live short lives, and just produce a lot of offspring. Those will leave more offspring and will be selected for than individuals with long development periods and long lifespan. Similarly, for the second option, early age at first reproduction is good because, like we just said, individuals should mature fast and then start reproducing fast. However, a long lifespan and then a few offspring with a lot of investment doesn't work as well, because if the survival is very poor in such an environment, you want to have a lot of offspring so that at least a few will survive, rather than a few offspring where you've invested a lot and none of them survive. So the second option doesn't work. The third one again doesn't work because of the a few offspring and relatively large investment. Like we just said, then if the survival rate is very low, a few offspring means you may have zero reproduction at the end of it. So the last option captures this life history strategy where resources are allocated so that the individual develops fast, starts reproducing fast, has many offspring and therefore puts relatively little in each offspring, but the chance of at least one of these surviving is now higher. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Okay, and then I think that's the only question till now.
I can read one of the question, which was it was about a lecture of Rohini. So this is interesting. Why dogs pee at some point of place? I mean, some place.
Oh, okay. Why do they? Okay.
Pee at
Maria, do you want to? I think it's a territoriality kind of question.
It's for territoriality. It's to mark the boundaries of their territory, and it's a form of signaling to mark the boundaries of their territory. That's what it is.
Yeah, and very often species have kind of almost these signposts, no, where on the border, if another individual is passing through, it might also mark there, maybe indicating that potentially in the future it might turn up there and try to challenge an individual. But yeah, it's very commonly seen in territorial species. So I think quite a few others have joined. So what we are doing is, apart while we are waiting for questions to come up in this current discussion session, we are also going over unanswered questions in the Q&A just to keep the discussion going. And Pravita is helping us by reading off some questions from the Q&A. But yeah, please post your question or raise your hand and we can and unmute and ask. Yeah, Pravita?
There is one more question. I think Maria answered that question. But still I'll read that. Hi, how can ecotypes be described in the terms of genotype, phenotype, genotype,
Yes.
in environment interaction? I think Maria
Right,
answered.
so I guess I didn't type up my answer, and I should do that. But we had this discussion at the last Q&A, that an ecotype can be considered the same way as any species. And so I mean, we've already discussed this, and so maybe this is not a good time to bring that up. But to help others, I will type up that answer and put it up. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, while others are posting their questions, I just answered a question now there, but since I did that just right now before our session, maybe I can just talk about it here. So this is a question from the mating systems part of the videos, and there Shubham had asked, if females are mating with multiple males for paternity confusion. That is, if they mated with only one male and say that male was another male challenged that male and took over that area, that male might kill the female's current offspring so that she's receptive again, and then he can mate with her, and therefore his reproduction increases. So one hypothesis is to avoid this, females carry out multiple mating so that there is paternity confusion and a new male doesn't kill the current offspring because they could be his offspring. And so Shubham's question was, but why would males then provide parental care in such a system, because they could be helping to take care of some other male's offspring? So that's a good question. And shouldn't they have evolved ways to stop that? So that's a good question. So the paternity confusion hypothesis has mostly been proposed for systems where males actually don't provide so much care. They might provide some care by being in the group and say protecting from a predator if a predator comes along, but they're usually not feeding the young or providing the kind of intense care that say many males do in many birds. So So some examples are like macaque species, some rodents, and so on. And the other part of this is, yes, in systems where there is a lot of parental care provided by males, there's some evidence that males have evolved traits whereby they reduce their care if the likelihood of those offspring, if there's a good chance those offspring, those young in the nest are not going to be their young, but young from another male. Males have evolved traits to reduce parental care. So, for example, if in some birds they've shown that if the female is away from the male for long periods during the time that eggs are laid, so during the fertile period, depending on the time she is away from the nest, the male's care, parental care correspondingly reduces. So if she's not there at the nest for a long time during her fertile period, the male actually does not care as much for the offspring, does not put in as much parental investment than if he and the female are together for most of the time during which she's fertile. So yes, males also evolve to adjust that costly parental care depending on the level of paternity confusion. Okay, any other questions on any discussion points or any interesting thoughts you had?
There's a comment here about the third module being a little bit difficult. Next week, Dr. Vishesha Gupta will be here for the live session, and he can help clarify some doubts. I think he's trying to develop some additional reference material for you now as well.
Yeah, I can imagine that, especially say if it's been a while since you've engaged a lot with math. So, for example, if you've taken math last in 10th standard, or depending on the stream you've been in 12th standard, it can be difficult. But I think when we were developing this course, we thought it's really important because, as you'll see, every aspect of ecology is strongly theory driven and is also very quantitative. So, it really helps to be able to say, understand the theory that drives a lot of ideas in ecology. So, the lectures that Maria and I gave also are strongly theory driven, a lot of modeling in there, and it's very useful to be able to read and understand that. And I think hopefully, Vishu with this extra, what Vishwesha will give with the extra material, that should really help. So there was one question from the assignment, but otherwise have the assignments have they been, have the questions made sense? Okay, there's another question here, but maybe just think also of, like Prabita has posted, if there are any questions regarding the assignments, we can discuss that also. Okay, so this question is about explaining aggression behavior between individuals in elephant herds. Yeah, so one thing I should mention is the example that I'd given is from the Asian elephant, a work done here in India. African elephants also have these fission fusion groups, but the dynamics there tend to be a little different. And some of it seems to be because the ecological conditions vary between where you find the African elephants and the Asian elephant. So now in Asian elephants, it's very interesting that the social interactions among females is very different from the social interactions among males, So the example given was actually about aggression between females, which we often don't think of. So the example there was about aggression between um, females in elephant herds. So these, like I'd explained there, these elephant herds, the largest unit or the clan consists of individuals who interact fairly frequently, but they don't interact all the time. So the smallest unit are these smaller groups, and these groups join, split over, it can be days, over weeks, and they also interact with other clans or groups from other clans. What these studies of aggression have shown that a lot of it seems to be about access to resources. Asian elephants live in these dry forests where resources can be quite limited at times. So this kind of aggression between individuals, the more successful individual or group gets access to resources. So in the case of females, this kind of aggression among females, a lot of this aggression seems to be for resources, not for mates. A lot of aggression among males seems to be for mates. So in Asian elephants themselves, in this species itself, males also show a lot of aggression, but that's usually in the context of getting mates. And here, group size seems to be helpful because larger groups are more likely to win in aggressive encounters. And the aggression doesn't always have to be physical, it can be approaches, kind of sound, signaling through sound, through calls, signaling through how they move, the displays with their trunks, and so on. And actual aggression, physical aggression, is kind of the last resort because it can be costly. You can get injured. I hope that was what you were looking for.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, this point, I think Prabita has answered this comment, which is, could we have the online session before the assignment? I think the way we are following the NPTEL structure, course structure, no, Prabita? This is the
Yes, it's
the broad,
yeah.
yeah, the NPTEL policy. And I think their idea is to kind of stimulate your thinking based on the material you've been exposed to and try to answer the assignments, and then to have us come in and help you think through any doubts that you had with the assignment. Oh, in the ornithology it's different, is it? Oh, I didn't know about that the assignments and online classes are. Maria, I think this is for you, this question. Is there an example of predatory behavior in the plant world where one tree species obstructs the development of other tree species? I can think of allelopathy, right?
Yeah, but I would consider that more competition than predation. So there's lots of examples, and in fact, almost all species experience competition, either within their own species or across species. And so plants certainly compete with each other, and they use a range of strategies. One would be allelochemicals, which are compounds that they release into the ground typically, that inhibit the growth of plants nearby. But there are other strategies, and they could just be out competing each other. So, for example, growing faster than competitors around you, at which point those plants that have a competitive advantage, shade out plants that are nearby, or shade out competitors that are nearby, or they pull resources faster than than competitors nearby. But plant-plant interactions typically we think of as competition and not predation.
I wonder, where do you think, Maria, this, you know how figs, I suppose it's more parasitic initially, yeah? Where the figs go and then the strangler figs.
Oh, the strangler fig. Right. That's actually a
That
great
like actually
example.
kill.
Yes, yes, that's a great example. I hadn't thought of that. Strangler figs could be considered not a predator per se, but a parasite where
Yeah.
they do use the host and take from the host resources until the host dies. So yes,
Yes.
that's a great example. Thanks, Kavita.
Yeah, plants are just so cool. So there's another question here.
Yes, I don't
Phenotypic.
remember. Yeah, I don't remember how I phrased it. Was it a fill in the blank question?
Yeah, I can read that question.
Yeah.
Okay. Phenotypic traits are the outcome of the options A, genotype, B, environmental conditions, C, interaction between genotype and the environment, D, all of these.
The answer is all of the above.
Yeah, yeah.
The phenotypic traits are an outcome of the genotype because that's the underlying genetic material that will encode phenotypic traits. It's also an outcome of environment independent of the genotype. So, for example, the same genotype could be given different resources during development, and one will grow bigger than the other. So, the environment alone can influence the phenotypic outcome. There could be an interaction between the genotype and the environment, where some genotypes may express traits that are enhanced or reduced depending on what environmental conditions they live in. So the answer is all three influence what kind of phenotype you end up with. What are the traits associated with that phenotype? And when we think of phenotype, we should sort of remember that we're not just describing traits as, you know, having something or not having something, but actually the expression of traits could be, you know, when we is continuous. So, for example, height or size, that's a continuous variable, right? It's not just having a trait or not having a trait, you know, having a color or not having a color, but the continuous nature of phenotypes is where environment plays a big role. Because if your environment varies, then the quality of that trait can vary. So you can get bigger or smaller or brighter or darker, depending on not just your genotype that encodes what color you are, what size you are, but how much resources you get, what type of resources, and how the genotype interacts with those resources. So the answer is all of the above: genotype, environment, and the interaction between genotype and environment.
Okay, so the next is a comment. I think again, I think previously also another participant had expressed this, that for the third and fourth week, without maths in their 11th and 12th, this has been a bit difficult. Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think we can all see that point. I'm not sure if you had been there when before we were just mentioning that the reason this aspect was brought in is because large parts of ecology are very quantitative and with math, with population ecology, which is what Vishwesha had handled, being quite a central part in ecology. Um, and hopefully, the idea is to give you a flavor of the kind of theory and how it is approached. So, even if, say, you are getting lost in the math, maybe using the slides, and then Vishwesha is going to give additional material next week, I think. Maybe using that and using the slides, seeing if you get an intuition of how one approaches theory in ecology. So, you know, there is a phenomenon, you want to understand it, you have a verbal model in your head that, population growth changes because of certain factors. And now you want to get a deeper insight, you have to translate words or even graphs into math, so that you can analyze. You can say, if I assume my hypothesis is this, if I assume ABC, do I actually get D? Or under what set of circumstances do I get outcome A, a population growing or a population crashing, or certain outcomes? So for that, one has to engage with theory. So although it is difficult, I would suggest that if you can, later on maybe step back and see, do I get an intuition of how theory is built in ecology, or what's the role of theory? And maybe these are some of the questions you could explore with Vishwesha in the live session next week and the week after, which is, if given this given the obstacles with engaging fully in week 3 and 4, what would be takeaways, or what would be ways to get deeper in it, if you are if your interest has been stimulated by this. But yes, it is the material can be difficult, as you've correctly said, if you've not had math for a while, and say if you're an art student. I think these are the only weeks where there is a very heavy theory, no, Maria. I think after this,
These are only weeks where it's very heavy math-based theory.
math-based, yeah. But as you would have
Yeah.
seen, everywhere there's theory,
Yeah.
right? From the individual portion, which Maria and I covered, and as you go into meta-populations, communities, ecosystems, it's all very, there is a broad theoretical framework that underpins the work that's done. Okay, so then there is a question. Sorry?
Listen, but your stats section, Kavita, your quant section will come up in a few weeks, and that's maths too.
Not math, actually. A lot of it is study design, and then yeah. And the statistics part is more thinking about statistical quantities and so on. We don't do actual math, but an understanding of probability is helpful.
Yeah.
But that I think probability comes earlier in school syllabus. I don't fully remember, but yes. So I'd be interested, actually, after Vishwesha's component, there is a study design component. I'll be really interested to hear from you about if you found any of it challenging from a math point of view, and I could also provide more information. And this also, helps us put together references for, say, the next iteration of this course.
Yeah.
There's a question here. Are communication and altruism related? Is this Samiksha? Samiksha, if you're there and can unmute, able to speak, would you be able to tell me a little bit more of what you're thinking about?
Ma'am, in case of communication, actually, the animals send signals to other individuals of the same species. And in case of altruism also, they do the same thing, but the actor acts, and they can cost or they cannot cost their lives, but and the individuals to whom they are giving the alarm, they can get benefit. So are these two terms related to each other, or?
Okay. Yeah. I got it. So, as you correctly pointed out, with altruism behaviors are said to be altruistic when the individual, the actor performing that behavior, suffers a cost, and the recipient of that behavior gets a benefit. The altruistic behavior does not itself have to be in the form of communication. So alarm calling is a great example where it is a kind of acoustic trait. It's a behavior, a call that the actor does, which could be costly to it because it's attracting the attention of the predator, and it could be beneficial for those around this actor. You can have altruistic acts that don't involve communication. So, for example, where the extreme example, like in bees, where you have sterile individuals that basically give up their own direct reproduction and instead help to rear the offspring of the help to bring up the young of the queen. So altruism may or may not involve communication. Now, when you come to communication, communication is, again, as you said, a case where you have an individual producing a signal that is directed towards a recipient, and there's a recipient that receives the signal. But this kind of communication can happen in all kinds of contexts, not just altruism. Communication, like an example previously, was about dogs scent marking or urinating in different parts of a territory. That's also communication, but it can happen without any altruism. So it can be it can be for selfish reasons, it can be for mutually beneficial reasons, it can be in the case of altruism. So communication largely refers to information being produced and directed and being received. And that can happen in different contexts, including altruism. I'm not sure if this was your point. In more complex, is it that in the case of social behavior, would you have more communication? That's not actually clear, because in solitary systems also you get a lot of communication. Some of it may be direct, some of it may be indirect. I hope this addressed your question.
So in case of bacteria's quorum sensing, they are actually communicating each other.
Yes.
Yes, they are.
Yes, they are.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe Maria, you could just quickly mention, because it's something I never mentioned, about different modes of communication. Like with bacteria, it wouldn't be the same as alarm calling.
Yes, that's true. So I think this was mostly Rohini's lecture where we were talking about communication and signal modalities, but signals can be in all sorts of modalities, be chemical, visual, auditory, even tactile. So, and vibrational or electric. So there's a whole range of ways that individuals can communicate with each other, both within the same species as well as across species. I mean, so far we've been talking about communication in intra-specific, so individuals of the same species communicating to each other, but individuals also, like species, can interact with other species in both the competition and predation context, not in the mating context, but in the competition and predation context. So one example is aposomatism that we talked of in the predator-prey lecture. That's communication by a prey to a predator about its unpalatability, right? Using visual signals, color, for example. And you can have communication that goes across species, that's competition. So different species that compete with each other can use, auditory cues, for example. They can make calls and other species can hear that. That is also relevant when we think of alarm calling, for example. Alarm calling done by some species are heard by other species, right? So actually communication can be quite powerful and across different modalities.
And I think in a later lecture, I think Saskia will be covering also these plant-animal interactions, some of it with communications, with communication involved. Okay, I can't see any further. Yeah. Any other questions, or you want to raise your hand and unmute and speak, or? Ah. Plant pollinator interactions. Facilitation can change into. Oh, so this is Kunjan. So Kunjan, do you mean facilitation as in, say if you have an invasive plant and a native plant, the invasive could, by say having a lot of inflorescences, actually facilitate pollinators coming there. So the native plant also benefits from increased pollinator visits, but then at some point it tips into the invasive plant competing for the pollinator. Is that the kind of facilitation competition you're thinking of?
Yeah, so one example that you mentioned is that, and sometimes
Hmm.
like when there are like multiple pollinators on a particular plant,
Hmm.
it gives access to other small pollinators as well. So at particular point when there's a lot of pollinators on a particular plant, you will find more nectar, more pollens. But after a while, when the competition, like when there are more number of pollinators, then starts the competition. So the dynamics of facilitation into competition and such a mutualism is something that I find really interesting. But this is a
Yeah.
model which I know in plant pollinators. Are there any other models where something like this happens, like in maybe a mammalian system or maybe aquatic? I was just curious. I mean,
Okay, so you're thinking of where like the nature of the interaction being beneficial to costly, the payoffs keep changing for those involved in the system. You're thinking of
exactly.
examples for that? Yeah. I mean, one thing I can think of is where, which I think might come up later in community ecology, is where, say, if you have multiple prey for a predator, a prey species can either reduce predation for the other prey species involved, or if it's really abundant, by increasing the number of the predator, I mean supporting a high predator population, it can actually then cause even more of a negative impact on the second prey species. I think Maria might know more about such an example, but I know that there are these indirect interactions where uh, prey species A can either reduce impact of predation on prey species B because the predator feeds on both, or actually increase it because of it being so abundant and resulting in an increase in predator species in the predator population, which then works down into a negative impact on prey species B. But I think those kinds of interactions will come up more in the community ecology,
It
species
certainly
interaction
will.
sessions.
But but those aren't facilitation necessarily.
No.
No,
It's
those
more like whether you get a, for prey species B, whether its um, per capita predation risk is lower in the presence of the other one, and then tips over it into being higher in the presence of the other prey species. But it wouldn't be an active interaction,
yeah.
facilitative or a competitive.
I think facilitation could possibly be in maybe scavenging. I mean, the part where there could be scavengers, again, at some point it will be facilitation, then maybe it can become into a competition. That's another example which I can think of right now.
Possibly.
Yeah. In mixed species flocks also. So, in some cases, by say flushing insects, one species could increase access to resources for another species, but depending on the numbers, that can again tip over into competition, depending on the relative numbers of the flushed prey and the mixed species flock members around. Yeah, those are actually really interesting. I mean, that's an important point you've brought up, which is many of these interactions are very either behavioral or say evolutionary interactions between species. are very dynamic, and depending on ecological conditions, can shift in their nature.
Correct, correct, exactly. Thank you so much.
I have to leave shortly, but I will answer this one question here about camouflage. So, how does a chameleon get help? What's its camouflage behavior for? Is it a defense mechanism against predators, or does it help it get prey? It does work in both cases, and in fact, there's a third reason for the color change in chameleons, and it's social behavior. So chameleons use color change to socially interact with each other. So, what it evolved for, it's best understood as an anti-predator strategy that has then been co-opted for other uses. Right? So the ability to camouflage and ability to background match is best explained by the need to minimize predation risk or to avoid being seen by predators, detected by predators. After that, that color changing ability is then being used in other contexts. Now, chameleons' hunting strategy doesn't necessarily need camouflage. It does benefit it, but it doesn't need camouflage necessarily. So in cases like the chameleon, the evolution of that camouflage is for anti-predator behaviors that was then used for other contexts like social and predator and predatory behavior of that chameleon itself. I'm not sure I understood the last bit of your question, but someone choose the one. I don't understand that last question, but I hope I've answered what you're asking. There's a question here about alarm calls, Kavita. Do you see that?
Yeah. So the question here is, are the alarm calls by sentinel species meant specifically to alert other species, or are they benefiting from calls as a side effect? So I'm not, I can't recall all the studies, because to test this idea, one would want to know whether the sentinel species performs those alarm calls only when it is in a mixed species group, and say when it's in a conspecific, meaning with others of the same species, it doesn't perform that. So evidence like that would suggest that alarm calling by the sentinel species, that has actually evolved in the context of a mixed species group, that it's directed in the. But however, just thinking back about the studies that I have primarily drawn from, there it seems like a behavior that the alarm calling by the sentinel species is anyway done when it's together with others of the same species. It continues to do that in a mixed species group also. So it's, I think, a similar case to what Maria was saying right now about how you can have a behavior evolve under a set of selection pressures and ecological conditions. When those conditions change, when the selection pressures change, that behavior can now be co-opted, meaning it now produces benefits in a new context, and now, so therefore its function has now shifted. One interesting thing about alarm calls that I wanted to, where is it? Yeah, where is that question? Yeah, one interesting thing about alarm calls is that the new context in which it is used seems to be deception. So, for example, drongos, the bird drongos, um, often associate with other birds in mixed species flocks, and they call not only when they see a predator, but sometimes when other birds have found food. They sometimes call and the birds scatter, and then the drongos go and pick up that food. That's called kleptoparasitism, basically, where it is picking up food that some other individual has found and caught. So now you actually have alarm calling being used in a deception context, and that has been studied in some mixed species groups also. But yeah, so to quickly wrap up that question, alarm calls have rarely evolved particularly to alert other species. They've usually evolved as alarm calls for the same species, for conspecifics, and then been used in the context of mixed species groups. So this question is, sentinels can we call? Yeah, so the terms, can we call barking deer and langurs as sentinels also? So sentinels were, the term actually just means individuals who seem to be on the lookout for predators. So in fact, any species could be a sentinel. Often certain birds like drongos, which are often at a higher, have a higher strata in the mixed species group. They are higher up in the canopy, say, compared to ground foraging birds. They are often called sentinels, but even within a conspecific group, meaning groups of the same species, like for example, in meerkat groups, you can have some individuals who go up onto little mounds of earth or on a branch of on top of a tree and look around, and that behavior is often called sentineling or sentinel behavior, and it's considered to be behavior where the individuals are actively scanning for predators. Okay. Any other questions? I don't think I missed any question. Yeah, please let me know if you want to either unmute and ask or if you want to type in the chat. And I was just looking also at the Q&A. I think in the discussion forum, we've answered all questions. And next week, Vishwesha will be here for his module.
Kavita, there is one more question. Can you ask? Payoff.
One new question. Yeah. Payoffs of life history theory. Okay. So I'm not sure exactly what the question is, but let me try and address it. So as Maria explained when she first started taking the modules, to understand different characteristics that individuals show of any taxa, plant, animal, microbe, anything, we try to understand. So for example, some of the traits we were looking at is particular anti-predatory behavior, like making alarm calls or forming groups or something else, or particular color patterns, either bright color patterns or cryptic color patterns. What we try to do is to understand, if we want to understand why we see that particular phenomenon in nature, we try to understand what are the costs and benefits of it. If the costs are very high, we shouldn't see that phenomenon unless there is a large benefit that outweighs the cost. Apart from costs and benefits, there are also constraints. Like with a certain body plan, an individual can't just do anything. There are constraints. There are and anatomical constraints, there are physiological constraints depending on the temperatures at which we can function. The kinds of things we do are also constrained by that. So given all these constraints, given the costs and benefits, we expect to see certain kinds of traits, or by trait what we mean is characteristics. We expect certain kinds of characteristics to provide an advantage, and therefore those who carry that characteristics leave more offspring, so you have more copies of those genes in subsequent generations. That spreads, and now you see that characteristic very commonly in a population. So that's the broad theory. In life history traits are also treated in the same way. So by life history traits, what we are referring to is a whole sequence and timing of different decisions to do with survival and reproduction. So what is the juvenile or maturation period, the development period? When do individuals start reproducing? How do they time different reproduction events? Do you have only one reproduction event or many reproduction events? In an individual reproduction event, how many offspring do you produce? How much do you invest in each offspring? How well do you survive? How long is your lifespan? And so on. So those are all part of life history strategies. Now the question is, given that an organism has only limited resources, how does it now partition it? And by, we are not talking about conscious decisions, we're talking about evolution acting. Imagine one individual with a mutation that makes it put so much resources into survival and so much into reproduction, and another one with a different mutation. Whichever leaves more copies is going to spread through the population. So for life history theory, the key parts of the framework, first of all, is that resources are limited. So you can't have what has been very nicely called a Darwinian demon. So a Darwinian demon is an individual which develops very fast, starts reproducing very fast, lives forever, and has lots and lots and lots and lots of offspring. Obviously, you don't see any individuals like that. And that's because resources are constrained. So given that resources are constrained, what you have is a second key element of life history theory, which is trade-offs. If I put more into surviving, fighting off disease, fighting, running away fast from predators, etc., I'll have less, individuals will have less resources to produce offspring. So that's the trade-off. So given these trade-offs, then we ask, what is the payoff for different possible options? So you can have, say, the option of living long but producing very few offspring, or you can have the option of living short, producing many offspring. What is the payoff? Meaning, what is the benefit minus cost, that ultimate fitness that you get? Benefit minus cost, or net benefit. What is that net benefit for different options? And the option with the maximum net benefit, maximum payoff, is the one that we expect evolution, selection to favor. So I hope that made sense. So it's basically payoffs is a way of saying benefit minus cost. And it can be for life history traits, but it can be for behavioral, morphological, anything, physiological traits, and so on. Okay, so we are almost there at the end of the session. If you have, even for older modules, if new questions come up, do post them in the forum. We'll keep checking it, and Prabita also alerts us if we have omitted to answer any questions. So from the modules that we've just finished now, if new questions come up, please do post them. It's very interesting. We also enjoy responding to them.
Kavita, can I add something? So if you have like questions which you like you didn't ask now, you can also add that in the Q&A. Like, better to have more questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so then I think we are coming to the end of this session. We have a few more minutes. I think the next two sessions, Pravida, correct me if I'm wrong, next two sessions Vishwesha will handle, no?
Yes, Professor Vishwesh will handle, and next the third one from here will be like yours.
Yeah. And after that, we have study design, like how exactly one designs and carries out studies in ecology, 1 week. So that module, I'll again come back for that. Great. Anyway, thanks for all these great questions. It makes us also think and it makes it fun for us also. So great to see you also engaged with the course. Very exciting for us.
Thank you, Kavita. And Maria left already, but and so I think we can wind up.
We can
Okay.
actually.
Okay. Thank you all for
Okay.
attending.
Thanks everyone.